There's an interesting parable in the 16th chapter of Luke that tells us about a man who is really a shrewd manager. He's really not a very good man, and Jesus commends him. And we can't help but wonder, why would Jesus commend a man like this? And we want to take a look at this parable tonight and see what kind of a person this was and what Jesus said about him, and why did Jesus say this? 16th chapter of Luke, beginning with the first verse. Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this that I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you can no longer be a manager." And the manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll do this so that when I lose my job, people will welcome me into their homes." So he called each one of the master's debtors, and he asked the first one, "How much do you owe my master?" 800 gallons of olive oil, he said. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down, and quickly make it 400. And then he asked the second, "How much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it out for 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in their dealings with their own kind than are the people of light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed into their eternal dwellings." Isn't that some parable? That parable is so unusual that there are some Bible scholars who believe that this was not a parable of Jesus at all, that somebody just inserted this thing in and into some of the manuscript because they couldn't understand Jesus saying these things or commending this unrighteous man, this evil man, this cheat. Now, it's interesting that the New International Version, which I read from, calls this fellow a manager. Well, just as the New International does a whole lot of times, they soften things down a lot of times to make it not sound quite so harsh. The literal Greek word is what we talked about this morning. He was a steward. He was a manager who was also a trustee. And he had charge of things, just like in the lesson that we had for this morning. Well, what's the meaning of this parable? The first thing that we run into is that Jesus commended this man because he was a shrewd manager. He was a shrewd trustee. What did Jesus bring out of this? What was the lesson that he brought out? Well, he commended the man, but the man was dishonest. So what did Jesus commend about this fellow? He commended this fellow's foresight. He said, this fellow says to himself, "I've lost my job. What am I going to do?" He made some plans. And that's what Jesus was commending about this man, was that he made some plans. Well, a lot of people, when we run into a problem, they say, "Oh, I'm defeated," and they give up. Can you imagine a sports organization that, when they see that they're behind, they just give up? No, they play until the end of the game. They might not play quite so well because they're discouraged, but they don't give it up. There are people who, I call them naysayers. That's a common term. They always find fault. They find all the problems. They know exactly what's wrong. They know exactly what has failed in the past. And so these naysayers, they're discouragers. Now, let's look at the opposite of that for just a minute. You remember the fellow named Barnabas? I know that Rudy knows about Barnabas. Rudy is preparing a lesson on Barnabas. Barnabas meant son of exhortation or son of encouragement. Some of you knew a fellow by the name of George Beale. George Beale used to go to this congregation many, many years ago. And when I moved to Glendale in 1967, he was at Glendale. And then George went out and helped establish the North Oaks Church of Christ. I've never known a man that was as encouraging as George Beale. Not because he said, "Oh, Jack, that's the greatest sermon I ever heard in my whole life." No, he never said that. Probably that was not true anyway. But it wasn't the idea that he complimented. He knew how to encourage people. He knew how to say, "I appreciate. I see you doing this. I see you doing that, and I appreciate what you do." Well, you know, sometimes that goes a long way with people, just to know they're appreciated. How long has it been since you said to somebody at work, who is maybe one of the people that you supervise, or in a congregation, just to say, "Hey, I really appreciate what you do"? That's a vital thing. And Jesus was commending this unrighteous steward because he had foresight. Now, foresight takes the form of all kinds of things. What I mentioned just a moment ago, it takes the form of encouragement, looking and seeing what other people are doing, and just simply saying, "I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're doing." And then there are people who say, "Oh, we tried that before and just never did work. We did that before and it failed. Nobody will volunteer. Nobody will work. Nobody will help." No, as long as we have that attitude, nobody will. Nobody will. That's kind of like they used to say. I used to have a little route when I was a little boy. I had a little route, and I went from house to house selling magazines. Didn't sell very many. I was not a very good salesman, but I went from place to place, from house to house, selling magazines. A lot of us did that back in those days. Nobody here is old enough to remember that, I guess. But one of the things that our supervisor told us, he said, "Be positive when you go to a house." Said, "There's a difference. You walk to a house, knock on the door. A lady, usually it was a lady, would come to the door, and the first thing you say is, 'You don't want to buy the magazine, do you?' No. Find out what's in the magazine. Approach the people. 'I'm selling Liberty Magazine. There's a wonderful story in it this week about this or that. There's a lot of good information.'" And the first thing you know, you have people interested that way. And Jesus commended this man because he thought ahead. He thought ahead. He was resourceful about the thing. What if he had said, for example, "Well, I lost my job. I guess I'm going to have to go on welfare. I lost my job. I don't know where the next meal is coming from." No, he was creative. He said to himself, "I've lost my job, but this is what I'm going to do." And so he planned to do some things like that. I remember when I was in junior high school, we put on a play in the assembly about Christopher Columbus. And I remember the little boy that played the part of Columbus. Oh, he really got into that thing, you know. And you remember Columbus met with some threatened mutiny. And Columbus could have said, "Oh my goodness, I don't want to have mutiny here. They may throw me overboard. We better turn around and go back." No, Columbus, when he was threatened with mutiny, He said, sail on, sail on, sail on and on. And I remember this little boy, oh, he just got excited about that, and he was holding a flag, and he banged the flag on the deck, and he said, sail on, sail on. Well, that was the idea, you see. That was what Jesus was really saying. Jesus not only commended this man for his foresight, but he was an ingenious fellow. Probably you and I would never have thought of reducing the amounts, that these people owed. But he called the man, he called the debtors in, and he said, how much do you owe? I owe this much. Well, that's okay, just pay so-and-so, and we'll count it off. Well, I saw a Cadillac one time. Thought I was driving around in this Cadillac. And this Cadillac, it was years ago, before the lemon laws came along, but this Cadillac had in big letters on the side, this is a lemon. This is a lemon. He had to have all kinds of trouble with that Cadillac, and he couldn't get General Motors to straighten it out, so he thought that he would publicize that fact. Sometime after that, there was a fellow who had a Lincoln Continental, and he drove it up on the lawn in front of the Ford Motor Company and set it on fire in protest to the fact that it was a lemon, it was no good. Well, we have an expression for that, don't we? If you've got lemons, make lemonade. Yeah, make lemonade. Sour things can have a little bit of sugar, and they taste better. And you remember Mary Poppins? A little bit of sugar lets the medicine go down. Well, that's the idea. We can take things that are problems for us, things that are difficult, and stop and think about, how can I use this? How can I make something good come out of something that's bad? And so Jesus talked about that. Well, we've got another expression, think outside the box. Think outside of the box. Another one, I really like this. Admiral David Farragut, the Battle of Mobile. You remember this from your high school history class. Battle of Mobile, and the ships were sailing into Mobile Bay. I used to live right close to Mobile Bay, and I've been there many times. The ships were sailing into Mobile Bay, and all of a sudden, they all slowed down. And the admiral said, why are they slowing down? And the word came back, there's a minefield up there. They called them torpedoes. The mines they called torpedoes. And he used an expletive here, which I guess maybe I better not use. But he says, blank those torpedoes, full speed ahead. And they won the battle. I don't know how many ships were lost. This is a traditional thing. Nobody really knows exactly what he said, but the idea was we're going to overcome the obstacles. Yes, it may cost us something, but we are going to overcome the obstacles, and this is one of the things that Jesus was talking about. I've got a poem here. I've read this poem to you a number of times. It's such a wonderful poem. It's a song. And it's just the words are so wonderful about it, and it fits right into this. And as I was preparing this lesson, I thought of this poem, and I said, oh me, I wonder if they'll let me read that thing again, because I've read it so many times. But I heard it one time when I was in Vienna at the graduation of our school, college graduation. An American businessman made a speech. I don't know who this fellow was, and I can't call his name, and so I'll tell you, it's the worst speech I've ever heard. It was really a poor speech. And he read this poem, and he just went brrrr, had no expression to it at all, and it just kind of impressed me that he was not trying to communicate the feeling of the poem. Now, I'm not a great reader, but I'll tell you, I hope we can see something of the greatness of this idea. It's the story of Don Quixote. Don Quixote was, he was an impossible guy. He had no real talent, but he decided he would be a knight errant, and he got his squire, and he had a horse, and he dressed up in armor and all this sort of thing, and he was going to go out, and he was going to literally just change the world, you know. And so this story was made into a movie called The Man of La Mancha, and I saw the stage play. And this poem was written by a fellow by the name of Joe Darien. Now, I don't know anything about Joe Darien. It goes back to 1972. But listen to it. Absorb it. Get the feeling and the mood of it. And think in terms of our lives, the congregation, our families, all of the things, all of the people that we're involved with, and the goals of our lives, and the dreams of our lives. These things are so important. To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbeatable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love pure and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And I know if I'll only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to rest. And the world will be better for this, that one man, scorned and covered with scars, strove till the last ounce of his courage to reach the unreachable star. That does something for me. I hope it does for you. It's a wonderful idea. It's a wonderful thought that comes, that here is the story. Yes, it's just a story, but here is the story of a man who will not admit defeat. Not only will he not admit defeat, he refuses to be defeated. Well, turn lemons into lemonade. The Impossible Dream. Admiral David Farragut. Examples of this idea. Well, Jesus commended the unjust steward. Why did he commend him? Well, this fellow says, there's certain things I can't do. And then there's some things that I won't do. Lazy? Well, I don't know, maybe so. Not very talented? Probably. But he was a man of ideas. And so this man said, I can't dig, I'm not strong enough for that. I can't do manual labor. I'm ashamed to be a beggar. But this is what I will do. And so Jesus commended him. Prior to the date of January 15th, 2009, nobody had heard of a fellow by the name of Captain Chelsea B. Sullenberger. Did any of you remember who Sully was? Yeah. Why? Because he faced a life or death situation, and he didn't give up. And you know something? After the landing in the Hudson River, and every person in that plane survived. Nobody died. 5 people were injured, 3 were injured slightly, and 2 were injured rather seriously. No one died as a result of that. And then after that was all over, the computer experts and the aeronautical experts put this whole thing on a trainer. And these trainers, you know, they're all computerized and all that. And they could not get anybody who could land the plane under those conditions and not crash. But he did it. He did it. I listened just before I came in. I went back in the internet and I listened to the conversations, the real conversations between the tower and this man. And one of the things was he was taking off. And this is the first time, by the way, I had actually listened to this. I knew the story, but I really listened to it. And as he was taking off, he reported, you know, I'm at such and such an altitude and we're making a left turn and all this sort of thing. And then all of a sudden he says, we just ran through a flock of geese and I've lost both engines. He was not panicky or anything like that. He was very calm and he said, we've lost both engines. And the tower was very calm and they came back and said, come back to the field, turn around. He tried to do that, but there was not any power left. And he was only 1,200 or 1,500 feet off the ground, and he didn't have enough altitude to glide that far, and he had only one choice, and that choice was, I've got to land this plane in the water. And he did. Very skillful man. He had been a Navy fighter pilot, and he was a very skillful man. But this was the supreme test of his skill. Now, he could have panicked and said, I've never done this before. I don't know what to do. This is bad. This is terrible. Yeah, he could have said that, and he probably would have crashed. But he faced the problem calmly. And basically, I think what went on in his mind probably was, I've got to do this. I've got to do it right. I have 150 people, passengers, and I've got 5 crew. I've got to save their lives. And so he faced his problem. He didn't deny the problem. He didn't sweep it under the rug. You can't do that in a situation like that, can you? Instead, I think probably what went on in his mind was, I want to see my wife again. I want to see my children again. I've got to do the best job that I'm capable of doing. And he kept his cool. And it showed a picture of this plane as it splashed down in the water. And it was a dramatic thing. And then this man, you know, after the passengers got out on the wings, you remember that picture, don't you? You know what he did? He went back through the cabin to be sure that everybody was out. You see, when we get our minds off of ourselves and we begin looking at the solutions to problems, how can we do better? How can we make a better situation out of a bad situation? When we look at it that way, problems can be solved. You and I need to stop and think about what our general situation is. By the general situation, I'm just simply talking about the fact that we have families, we have friends, we have community, we have church, we have job, we have all sorts of relationships that we have, and I'll guarantee you that there are problems and difficulties that arise in every one of them. And we can sit back and we can curse the darkness and never turn on the light. We can sit back and talk about how bad things are and never really try to make them better. We can find out all of the faults, all of the problems that are all around us, and that never solves anything. That generally just makes things worse. Instead, Jesus commended this man, an unrighteous man, for his foresight, for his willingness to try to solve the problem. And so Jesus ended up saying, the children of darkness are wiser in generation than the children of light. Things go on in churches that would never be permitted in the business world. People get away with things in churches that they could never get away with in the business world. People are negligent in churches, and they could never be that way in the business world. There are so many things like this that are so very important for us. And so Jesus commended this man because when the problem came, he was willing to sit down and say, I can't do this, I can't do that. Here is what I will do. And he saw that this presented a possibility to him. I hope you won't misunderstand what I'm going to say now. Christianity is, in the broad sense of the word, I'm talking about everything in America, everything in the world that claims to be Christian. Christianity is growing very, very slowly in the world. I went back to a study that was made by the University of North Carolina, the School of Business over there. And they were studying some things about religions. Well, in the world, really, but they finally came down to apply these things primarily to the United States and the United Kingdom. What is the fastest growing religion in the world? Islam. Fastest growing religion in the world. Probably one, especially in the United States, probably one that is hated more than any other in the world. Stop and think for a minute. The time when Christianity was hated, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century and through there, when it was hated, it grew. Because people saw that what they loved the most was being threatened. And Christianity grew at that time. Well, Christianity is not hated, it's just ignored today. Let me read you some statistics. The Muslims believe very deeply that they have a message of life or death, eternal life or eternal death. They believe very strongly that they have that message. And as a result, they're willing to do just about anything to spread their message. Now, there are obstacles in their way. And unfortunately, Christians are one of their obstacles. And the Jewish people are one of their obstacles. There are other obstacles that they have, but they are willing to commit suicide in order to spread their faith. They're willing to kill other people in order to spread their faith. There are about 1.3 billion members, and they're growing at a rate of 1.84% between 2000 and 2005. Based on this same study, the University of North Carolina saw that Christianity is in 6th place in the world. It's ahead of Islam in number of adherents. There are approximately 2.2 billion members, people who call themselves Christians in some way. But here are some faiths that are ahead of us. Islam, mentioned that. The Baha'i faith, we don't know very much about that over here. It's an offshoot of Islam. The Sikhism, which is an offshoot of Hinduism. Jainism, which is a minor religion in India. And Hinduism. Now, these statistics are not absolutely accurate because they're based on the number of adherents that they have and the percent of their growth. And so, well, if I start a new religion today and I convert one people, I've had 100% growth. And so these statistics are not absolute or anything like that. But those that I mentioned are the ones that are ahead of us. Where is Christianity? Christianity is number 6. Christianity is growing at the rate of 1.38% between the year 2000 and 2005. Islam is growing at the rate of 1.84%. All that I'm trying to say on that, friends, is that maybe we have lost something in our thinking. Maybe we've lost something about the urgency of the message of Christianity. So in reference to this unrighteous steward, are we being clever? Are we being creative? Are we trying to solve the problem? Or are we rocking along and not doing anything much about it, not thinking anything much about it, making excuses about why it's not growing, why we are not growing? Or what are we doing to correct that situation? And that's the story of this unrighteous steward. We have the greatest message that the world has ever known. Let's make something of it. Let's sit back and see how creative we can be in trying to stay within the bounds of biblical teaching, but at the same time, try and see what is needed in spreading the gospel and that message. Let's stand together now and sing, please.